Why was the radio so quiet after the screaming stopped? It was 03:42 hours when the world changed. Static. Then a voice panicked sharp through the comms. They have the colonel. Repeat, they have the colonel. Gunfire shouting in Arabic. Then nothing, just dead air. Captain Norah Hill stared at the lifeless radio, her knuckles pale against the edge of the operations table. Around her, the tactical operations center was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Every man in that room knew what it meant when the signal went dead in this part of Syria. The battalion commander, Colonel Marcus Hayes, her mentor, her reason for staying in this unit, had been captured by a force known for broadcasting their executions before the sun rose. Standard protocol was clear. Assemble a rescue team, wait for authorization, coordinate with command, spend hours planning. But hours were death here. By the time any official team moved, Hayes would be gone. Norah didn't wait, she just stared at the map. The hostile compound was 15 kilometers northeast. That's all she needed to see. 15 kilometers of sand, fear, and silence between her and the man who had once told her, "Prove that you belong here." She turned away from the map, from the major giving orders, from the logic that said it was suicide, and walked out. No permission, no backup, just a decision that felt heavier than her rifle. Because sometimes, you didn't wait for permission to do what was right. You just went. 3 years earlier, she'd been standing in front of that same man, nervous, unproven, wearing a brand new Ranger tab that still felt too bright on her shoulder. He'd studied her file, unimpressed by words or grades. Then he'd looked at her, not like a woman in uniform, not like a rookie, but like a soldier who had to answer one question that mattered more than all the rest. "Lieutenant Hill, I don't care if you're male, female, or Martian. I care if you can lead soldiers in combat. Can you?" She swallowed, forced herself to meet his eyes. "Yes, sir." "Then prove it every day." She had. For 3 years, she'd led her platoon across deployments that broke some of the toughest soldiers she knew. She'd earned respect not by asking for it, but by surviving, by deciding, by being the calm in chaos. And through every hard lesson, Hayes had been there. The quiet guidance, the brutal honesty, the look that said, "You're better than you think, Hill, now prove it." Now he was out there, captured by the kind of enemy who didn't give second chances. And Norah Hill wasn't about to let the man who taught her courage die, waiting for someone else's orders. By 04:00 hours, she'd made her choice. Not a heroic one, just a necessary one. She loaded her rifle, her personal M4, custom-modified over years of service, fitted for precision and silence, checked 6 magazines, 210 rounds total, and slung her night vision rig across her shoulder. She packed light: water, a med kit, a knife. No insignia, no name tags. Nothing that said United States Army, because if she got caught, there would be no rescue. At the motor pool, the gate guard blinked when he saw her. "Ma'am, I don't have you on the movement log." Norah didn't pause. "Emergency supply run, Outpost Delta. I'll be back before morning formation." He hesitated, but young soldiers didn't question captains who walked with purpose and spoke like the mission was already done. He waved her through. That one hesitation bought her 10 minutes, the difference between protocol and instinct, between waiting for backup and saving a man's life. She climbed into an unmarked civilian pickup. No military plates, no identifying features. Just dust, dents, and the hum of an engine that sounded too loud against the silence of the desert. When she drove out of the gate, no one knew she wasn't coming back. The desert stretched ahead, a green haze through her night vision goggles. The roads were old, cracked, forgotten, but she knew them. She mapped this terrain 100 times in her mind. The patterns of patrols, the glow of villages sympathetic to the enemy, the ones too terrified to speak. Every sound mattered: the wind, the soft hiss of tires on grit, the distant echo of a motor that could mean pursuit or coincidence. She kept the rifle across her lap, window half down despite the cold. She listened. Because out here, hearing the wrong sound a second too late meant dying without a headline. The drive took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of silence broken only by the pulse of her heartbeat. She parked the truck 2 kilometers short of the target behind a low ridge, the kind of place a satellite might miss. She checked the horizon, the air, her instincts. Then she moved on foot. Every step was deliberate, calculated. She'd been trained to move like water, quiet, unseen, patient. The night pressed around her, the kind that swallowed light, memory, even fear. But she moved anyway because hesitation didn't belong on the battlefield. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the edge of the sky, she'd reached an overwatch position on a small rise overlooking the compound. She lay prone, breathing shallowly, watching through binoculars as the world below came into fragile focus. The compound looked exactly like every other enemy stronghold she'd ever seen, crude, fortified, a perfect symbol of arrogance. Mud brick walls enclosing a central courtyard, flat rooftops that doubled as gun nests, vehicles, 2 technicals, both armed, parked like silent threats. And through the cracked window of the main building, she saw him. Hayes. Bound, guarded, still alive. Her throat tightened. He was sitting, head upright, alert even in captivity. That was Hayes, calm under fire, composed even in defeat. And she knew exactly what they were planning for him. They'd torture him for intel. Then, when the cameras came out, they'd stage the execution for every screen from Raqqa to New York. Unless she stopped them. She studied the layout like a surgeon, planning an impossible operation. 6 visible guards on the walls, likely 6 more inside, 20 total give or take. She knew what the major back at base would say. This is beyond our capability. But beyond capability was a phrase invented by people who'd never had to decide between waiting and doing. 15 kilometers was close enough. And 20 fighters were just 20 chances to be precise. She exhaled once slow, then again slower. Her mind went silent, not peaceful, just still. This was what it felt like before the storm. That razor-thin moment when logic gave way to instinct, when you stopped asking if you could do it and started calculating how. She checked her weapon one final time. Then she pressed the transmit button on her small field radio, her one link to anyone who might still be listening. This is Captain Hill, conducting solo direct action on hostile compound at grid November Victor 478321. Multiple hostiles. Hostage extraction in progress. If you're monitoring, send support. If not, tell my family I went down swinging. Hill out. She turned off the radio, left it behind the ridge. Because this mission wasn't about being found. It was about one man. And the promise she'd made herself 3 years ago, that when the moment came, she'd act without hesitation. The first guard never saw her. 200 meters out, a single suppressed shot. He crumpled without a sound. The second turned, confused, died before his eyes registered movement. 2 down, 18 to go. She moved closer, crawling through an empty irrigation ditch, every shift of her weight a calculation in silence. A third guard appeared on the wall, scanning the perimeter with a flashlight beam that cut the dark like a blade. Norah waited, patient. Then one breath, one heartbeat, one pull of the trigger. 3 down, 17 left. The compound began to stir, voices shouting, confused, the pattern she'd expected. She reached the outer wall, planted a breaching charge, not explosive, but thermite. The kind that burned through mudbrick without lighting the world on fire. 10 seconds of bright molten hiss, and the wall softened enough to step through. Then chaos. She moved like smoke. No hesitation, no wasted motion. The first man through the courtyard doorway fell before he saw her. Then the next. Then another. Controlled pairs, center mass. 6 down, 14 to go. A machine gun roared from a rooftop. Tracer rounds ripped the air above her. She ducked behind a vehicle, came up on the other side, and dropped the gunner with 3 precise shots. 7 down, 13 left. She was counting because numbers made the world simpler. Numbers meant control in the middle of madness. 2 fighters burst from a side door. She dropped one, her magazine clicked empty. She reloaded without thought, the movement smoother than breath, and dropped the second. 9 down, 11 left. She advanced. Bullets chipped the walls, dust stung her eyes, but her focus didn't break. She was past fear now, in that narrow space between life and death where everything became mechanical. A fighter climbed to the roof with an RPG. She pivoted, fired once. The launcher tumbled from his grip before he did. 10 down, 10 left. She reached the main building, listened, heard muffled movement, dragging voices, panic. She kicked the door open. Inside, 2 guards, 1 hostage, Hayes. He was bound, gagged, but alive. The moment his eyes met hers, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, disbelief, pride. "Hold still, sir." She slid his restraints, her knife quick and clean. "Captain Hill, what the hell are you?" "Later, right now we move." They barely made it 3 steps into the courtyard before the entire compound erupted. Automatic fire, shouts, the sound of desperation. Norah shoved Hayes behind cover, returned fire, short, controlled bursts. Another fighter dropped, then another. 12 down, 8 to go. Hayes grabbed a fallen rifle, checked the magazine, and joined her. Years of command hadn't dulled his instincts. "You have an extraction plan." "Working on it, sir." He laughed, a sound too wild to belong here. They fought side by side, commander and captain, mentor and student, the desert morning turning gold as death closed in around them. The first grenade went off closer than she planned. Norah felt the concussion roll through her chest, dust raining from the roof as she pulled Hayes lower behind the overturned table that passed for cover. The courtyard was alive with gunfire, bursts of automatic fire cutting through morning haze, tracers slicing the air like angry fireflies. She trained for chaos like this, but training never carried the weight of someone else's life depending on you, especially his. Hayes fired back, short, controlled bursts. She caught his eyes, calm, deliberate, the same steadiness that had shaped her. He wasn't panicking. He was calculating. They both were. 8 hostiles still alive, 2 on the roof, 1 on the technical, the rest moving between shadows and walls. "We push left," she said, low, measured. "That gate?" he asked. "If it's still standing." He nodded. That was all they needed. They moved together, not the hierarchy of rank, but the rhythm of trust. She covered while he shifted. He covered while she moved. Years of training distilled into instinct. A fighter on the roof tried to track her. Norah dropped to a knee, lined up her sights, fired. The man's body tumbled forward in a lifeless arc. 7. The second rooftop guard shouted something in Arabic, a call for backup that would never come. Norah shot him mid-sentence. 6. Then the technical's gunner opened fire, the sound tearing through the morning like thunder. She felt the air rip beside her ear, the metallic bite of near misses. Hayes shouted something she didn't hear. She rolled, crawled, came up behind a support pillar and saw it, the belt feed exposed, the gunner reloading. She sprinted. 3 seconds of open space. 3 seconds of everything she was. Her shoulder slammed against the vehicle's fender. She fired up through the bed, 3 rounds into the gunner's chest. He fell back against the mount, the weapon silent. 5. The battlefield shifted. Silence came in uneven bursts, moments of nothing before the next volley. Hayes moved up beside her, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "We can't hold here." "We don't, we move." She pointed toward a breach in the east wall, the one she'd made earlier with thermite. Smoke still curled from the edges. "That's our way out." They ran. Bullets chased them, the sharp whine of rounds that came too close. Norah fired back without stopping, her breathing harsh but steady. They cleared the wall, dropped into the shallow ditch beyond, and kept moving. By the time they reached the ridge where she'd hidden the truck, her legs felt carved from stone. She turned to Hayes, checked him for wounds. He waved her off. Just bruised pride. For a moment neither spoke. The desert stretched out, endless and cruel. They'd done it. Against every odd they'd made it out. But Norah didn't smile, not yet. She scanned the horizon, empty for now, but she knew better than to believe in luck. "They'll regroup," she said. "Then we better not be here when they do." She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine. The truck rattled like an old beast dragged from sleep. Hayes climbed in beside her, setting his rifle between his knees. The road ahead shimmered under the rising sun. Norah pressed the accelerator. They drove in silence at first. Not the awkward kind, the kind born of exhaustion, adrenaline, and unspoken understanding. She felt her pulse slow, the edges of reality returning. Her hands shook slightly, delayed reaction, the body catching up to what the mind had already done. Hayes noticed. "You all right, Captain?" She nodded. "Fine, sir." "You don't look fine." "I'll process later." That made him smile, a small knowing smile. "That's what you always say." She didn't answer, because he was right. For people like them, later was a place emotions went to die quietly. The radio crackled to life, weak, but clear enough to catch a distant voice. "Unidentified vehicle, this is Falcon 2. Do you copy?" Norah grabbed the handset. "Falcon 2, this is Hill. We have the package." Static, then disbelief. "Captain Hill, you're alive. We saw the drone feed. We're en route to grid 8731. Need extraction. Immediate." "Stand by. We're tasking rotary assets to your position." Norah exhaled, finally a thread of safety. Hayes leaned back in the seat, staring at the horizon. "You realize you just turned a one-company problem into an international incident." She glanced over. "You're welcome, sir." He laughed softly. It was a strange sound, relief disguised as humor. "You always were terrible at following rules. You taught me to act when action was required." "I said act, not start a one-woman war." "Sometimes the line's thin." He smiled again, quieter this time. "Too thin sometimes." As the minutes stretched, she allowed herself to feel the fatigue. The weight of everything she'd done pressed in, 20 lives taken, 1 life saved, and the 1,000 invisible calculations that decided which mattered more. War had a way of simplifying morality until you tried to sleep. She didn't regret it, not yet, maybe not ever, but she knew there'd be a cost. Every operation left one, it just took time to surface. 10 kilometers, that's what she told herself, just 10 more. The sun rose higher, painting the desert in gold and blood. Wind carved thin lines through the sand, the kind that erased footprints faster than memory. Hayes dozed briefly beside her, exhaustion overtaking instinct. For the first time since the radio call, he looked human again. Older, vulnerable. Norah glanced at him and felt something twist inside her. He'd spent decades teaching officers to lead, to stay calm under pressure, to make hard calls. But no one taught you what it meant to save someone you admired, and to know you might have just destroyed your career doing it. She caught her reflection in the side mirror, dirt-streaked face, eyes too sharp, expression unreadable. For a second, she didn't recognize herself. That's when she realized the mission wasn't just about saving him. It was about proving something to herself she hadn't said out loud in years. That she belonged here, that she could lead, that she could act alone and still live with what came after. The first Apache appeared on the horizon, a black silhouette against the sun, blades chopping the air like thunder. Hayes stirred. They found us. Norah eased off the throttle, slowing near the crossroads she'd picked as extraction. Dust spiraled around them as the gunships banked overhead, clearing the perimeter. Then the Blackhawk descended, a wall of wind and noise. Norah parked, grabbed her rifle, and opened Hayes's door. "You first, sir." He gave her a look, half gratitude, half reprimand. "You realize you're going to have to explain this to about 4 different commands." "Yes, sir." "And you still went." "Would have gone even if it were 40. He shook his head, climbing aboard the chopper. "You're impossible. Learn from the best." As the helicopter lifted, Norah felt the weight of adrenaline collapse into exhaustion. The ground fell away, the compound a small smudge of smoke in the distance, the memory of 20 lifeless shapes fading into the haze. She sat against the fuselage wall, helmet in her lap, the hum of the rotors a lullaby for nerves that refused to rest. Hayes sat across from her, watching. "You know they're going to court-martial you for this." "Probably. Or give you a medal." She smirked. "Could go either way." "Which one do you think you deserve?" "Neither. I did what had to be done." He nodded slowly, eyes distant. "That's what scares them the most, people who act without waiting for permission." She looked out the open door. The desert stretched forever, empty, ancient, indifferent. Sometimes waiting costs lives. Sometimes acting does too. Their words hung there, suspended between engine noise and conscience. Back at base, silence greeted their arrival, not relief, not celebration, just the heavy quiet of disbelief. Officers and enlisted watched as Hayes stepped out first, alive, blood-streaked but walking. Behind him, Norah, rifle slung, expression unreadable. The major in charge rushed forward, voice trembling. "Captain Hill, you left this facility without authorization. Do you have any idea?" Hayes cut him off. "Major, she just saved my life. You'll let command handle the paperwork." Norah stood still, didn't argue, didn't explain, just looked past them toward the horizon she'd come from. Because part of her was still there, in that compound, in that moment before she pulled the trigger the first time. You never really came back from places like that. You just learned how to function afterward. Later in the debrief room, she sat alone with a glass of water she hadn't touched. Her uniform was dust-coated, sleeves torn, her hands trembling from the delayed tremor that came when adrenaline bled out. The door opened. Hayes stepped in. No aides, no rank between them now, just 2 soldiers who'd been through something no report could summarize. He studied her for a long moment. "You did it." She didn't look up. "You're alive, that's what matters. You broke every regulation we have." "Yes, sir." "And you don't regret it?" "No, sir." He exhaled a tired, almost fond sound. "That's why I knew it would be you." She looked at him then, surprised. "When they dragged me into that room," he said, "I thought about who might come. Not the teams, not the command structure, just the people I'd trust with my life. Your name was the only one that stuck." Silence, heavy, fragile. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't. She just nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement of something that didn't need words. He started to leave, then paused at the door. "They'll question you. They'll try to make sense of what you did. But remember this, Captain, doing the right thing doesn't always fit inside the rules. Sometimes courage looks a lot like disobedience." When he was gone, she finally exhaled the breath she'd been holding since 03, 42 hours. Outside, the desert was silent again. But inside her, something had shifted, a quiet certainty that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. That night Norah lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. It rarely did after missions, but this was different. Every sound of gunfire replayed behind her eyes, every face, every decision. She acted alone and won, but victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. And beneath the exhaustion, a question lingered like a ghost. Would she do it again? The answer came before the doubt finished forming. Yes. Because for all the rules, for all the consequences, some things were worth breaking for. Sometimes, the most dangerous kind of courage isn't loud or defiant. It's quiet, measured, the kind that moves forward when everyone else stays still. And somewhere, deep inside the stillness of the desert night, Captain Norah Hill closed her eyes not to forget, but to remember why she'd gone. Why did the base feel quieter when you came back alive? The next morning, Captain Norah Hill woke to the sound of nothing. No rotor wash, no briefing chatter, no morning formation outside her quarters. Just that hollow silence that came after everyone had already heard what she'd done. Word spread faster than any report. The captain who left alone. The one who broke every rule. The one who came back with the commander. Her name whispered down corridors, not in celebration but disbelief. The kind of disbelief that tasted like fear, because what she'd done wasn't supposed to be possible. When she stepped into the mess hall, the noise dropped. Soldiers looked away or pretended to. Some nodded subtle respect behind cautious eyes. Others looked down, unwilling to meet her gaze. Norah picked up a coffee she didn't want, sat alone at the far table, and stared at nothing. Her uniform still smelled of dust and gunpowder. Her hands were still raw where the rifle sling had rubbed them raw. Every sip was bitter. Across the room, two junior officers whispered she caught fragments. Suicidal, unauthorized, one-woman op. She didn't care, not outwardly, but somewhere inside it stung not the judgment but the misunderstanding. They didn't know what it felt like to hear someone you respected screaming over a dying radio. They didn't know what it was to sit still when you could move. That's what scared them. Not that she'd acted. That she'd chosen to. At 900 hours, the summons came. Captain Hill, command wants you in the briefing room. She already knew what that meant. 2 armed guards escorted her, protocol for anyone under investigation, even heroes. The hallway to the command center felt longer than usual. Every step echoed. Inside, a 3-man panel waited. Her site commander, a JAG officer, and a colonel she didn't recognize, the liaison from Special Operations Command. The colonel gestured to the seat opposite them. Captain Hill, have a seat. She did, back straight, hands still, eyes forward. The colonel studied her like a riddle. You understand why you're here? Yes, sir. Your decision to leave this facility without authorization constitutes a breach of operational protocol. Article 92, failure to obey an order or regulation. Yes, sir. And yet, he said slowly, you successfully extracted a senior officer from enemy hands, eliminated 20 hostile combatants, and sustained 0 friendly casualties. Silence filled the space between the facts. The JAG officer spoke next, his tone cautious. Captain Hill, before we proceed, do you wish to have legal counsel present? Norah shook her head. No, sir. You're aware that your answers today will become part of the official record. Yes, sir. He leaned back. Then let's start from the beginning. Why did you go alone? The question hung in the air, deceptively simple. Norah could have given the tactical answer: limited window of opportunity, risk of execution, lack of immediate support. But the truth was deeper. Because no one else was going to. She looked at him evenly, because waiting would have meant watching him die. The colonel didn't react, and you were certain of that. I was certain of the enemy, she said. We've seen their videos, their patterns. They don't keep hostages alive long enough for negotiations. So you acted on assumption. I acted on experience. That shut the room up for a moment. The colonel exchanged a glance with the site commander, the same man who told her to stay put. He cleared his throat. Captain, you disobeyed direct orders. Norah met his gaze. Yes, sir. You left without a team, without authorization, without backup. Yes, sir. You realize your decision could have compromised larger operations in the area. Yes, sir. He frowned. You don't sound remorseful. She held his eyes. With respect, sir, remorse doesn't bring people back. The JAG officer adjusted his glasses. Let's talk about the assault itself. The drone footage shows a single operator moving through a fortified compound with precision more consistent with special operations training than standard line tactics. Where did you learn that? Ranger School, 2 deployments, and a mentor who demanded competence. Hayes. The colonel's face softened a fraction, but his tone didn't. You realize the footage is already circulating through secure channels. They're calling it textbook execution. I wasn't trying to write a textbook, sir. I was trying to bring him home. He nodded slowly, studying her, the calm, the poise, the lack of apology. You understand there will be consequences regardless of outcome. Yes, sir. Do you regret your decision? Norah hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because she wanted the words to land right. I regret that it had to be done, she said finally, but I don't regret doing it. That afternoon, the investigators expanded. 2 generals arrived from higher command. They wanted context, intent, the why behind the how. Every question circled the same orbit: authorization, procedure, chain of command. None of them asked about fear, about loyalty, about what it felt like to act alone. By the second hour, she was answering on autopilot, voice steady, heart steady, eyes unblinking. I assessed the threat. I executed based on available intelligence. I made a decision consistent with survival of friendly forces. It sounded cold, almost rehearsed, but emotion had no place in transcripts. Still, when they asked, "Were you afraid?" she paused for the first time. Yes. The room stilled. Afraid of what? She met the general's eyes. That I'd be too late. He didn't press further. He didn't need to. 3 days. That's how long it took for command to review the operation. 3 days of waiting while officers dissected every second of her body cam footage, every shot fired, every breath recorded on the drone feed. Outside she was stone. Inside, the waiting hollowed her out. At night, the memories replayed, not the victories but the sounds. The sharp crack of rounds, the metallic click of an empty magazine, the breath that caught when she thought Hayes had been hit. She didn't dream, she just remembered. On the 3rd morning, she was called again. This time, only one man waited, the 2-star general from Special Operations Command. Gray hair, calm eyes, the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. He motioned to the chair. Sit, Captain. She did. He studied her for a moment, then spoke. Captain Hill, what you did was reckless, unauthorized, and a violation of roughly 40 regulations. Yes, sir. It was also tactically brilliant. She blinked, sir. He folded his hands. You executed a solo direct action raid that resulted in the rescue of a senior officer, 0 friendly casualties, and 20 confirmed enemy KIA. That's not reckless, that's exceptional. Sir, I acted outside. I know what you did, he interrupted, leaning forward. And I know why. Because every rulebook we've written was designed by people who never had to decide in real time whether someone lived or died. He stood, packing slowly. I should court-martial you. Yes, sir. Instead, he said, turning back, I'm promoting you. Norah stared at him. Sir. To Major, effective immediately. You're being reassigned to Special Operations Command. Her breath caught. I don't understand. You will, he said. We need officers who can think independently and execute under impossible pressure. You've proven you can do both. He smiled, faint, tired. But Major Hill, next time you conduct an unauthorized raid, at least leave a note. My heart can't take surprises like this." For the first time in days, she almost smiled. "Yes, sir." That night she stood outside the hangar, wind biting through her sleeves. The sky above Syria was endless, stars scattered across a velvet blackness that felt too peaceful for what it covered. She lit a cigarette she didn't smoke, habit from watching Hayes back when she was a lieutenant. Footsteps approached. He stopped beside her, hands in pockets, a faint bandage still visible around his wrist. "Promotion suits you," he said quietly. She exhaled smoke. "You heard." Hard not to. Half the command thinks it's the craziest thing they've seen. The other half wants to recruit you. She gave a tired laugh. "Guess it's a draw." Hayes looked at her for a long moment. "You did good, Norah." "I broke protocol, sir." "You saved a life." He paused, watching the horizon. "You know, when they dragged me into that compound, I didn't think I'd see daylight again. I remember thinking, if anyone was crazy enough to come, it'd be you." She smiled faintly. "Crazy seems to be the consensus. Courage looks a lot like that sometimes." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small box. "For you." Inside was a coin, custom-made, heavy, engraved with fire and smoke on one side. The other side read, "1 operator, 20 enemies, 0 regrets, Syria 2024. Norah laughed softly, the first real laugh since that night. "Completely inappropriate, sir." "That's why I had it made. Keep it. Remind yourself that courage isn't about orders. It's about doing what's right even when no one else does." She closed her hand around the coin. It felt warm despite the cold. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just keep proving them wrong." Back in her quarters, she turned the coin over in her palm again and again. The metal caught the dim light like memory. She thought about the men she'd killed, the ones she'd saved, and the line that separated duty from defiance. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe it was all the same line, drawn differently depending on who had the courage to cross it. She set the coin on her nightstand next to her rifle, two symbols of the same truth. Then she whispered to the empty room. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't wait for permission. And for the first time since that morning's radio call, she felt peace. Not because everything was right, but because she'd finally accepted the cost of what she'd done. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in firefights. They're fought afterward, in silence, in judgment, in memory. But real courage never needs witnesses. It just needs purpose. And somewhere in the quiet of that base, Major Norah Hill closed her eyes, knowing the next mission was already waiting, not in orders, but in whatever moment the world would need her to act again. Why did silence feel heavier when you were finally where you'd fought to belong? 2 months after Syria, Major Norah Hill stood in a room that didn't officially exist, deep underground, in a classified facility whose coordinates weren't written anywhere she could see. No flags, no nameplates, just a steel door, 2 biometric scanners, and a long hallway that smelled faintly of oil and gun cleaner. This was the threshold to a world few ever saw: Special Operations Command's Direct Action Unit. The one that didn't brief the press, didn't appear in budgets, didn't officially have personnel. It wasn't a promotion, it was a test. She stood at attention as the unit commander, a lieutenant colonel with 20 years in special operations, paced in front of a dozen operators, men and women cut from quiet steel. "This is Major Norah Hill," he said. "Most of you already know the story. She conducted a solo hostage rescue in Syria. 20 enemies down, 1 colonel alive, 0 friendly casualties." He let that hang a moment. "Some call it the craziest thing they've heard in a decade. I call it initiative under fire." He turned to her. "Welcome aboard, Major. Let's see if you can keep up." The operators didn't clap, didn't smile. They just watched her with the calm assessment of people who'd seen everything and trusted almost no one. In their eyes, there were no gender politics, no headlines. Only one question: can she do the job? She didn't speak, didn't need to. Respect wasn't earned through introductions. It was earned in movement under pressure, with rounds snapping past your head. And they'd find out soon enough. Training with them was different. It wasn't about endurance or obedience, it was about clarity, decision speed, the ability to think under chaos. She ran scenarios that blurred the line between simulation and reality. Hostage rescues in mock villages, night raids in freezing wind tunnels, weapons transitions in zero-light conditions where every second meant life or death. And she never complained, because this was the arena she'd wanted all her life. Every operator had a story that earned them the patch no one could wear in public. Most had scars they didn't talk about. Some were legends she'd read about in classified briefings years ago. Now she trained beside them. One afternoon during a live-fire drill, one of them, Sergeant Mason, a broad-shouldered medic with a ranger background, turned to her between reloads. "You really went alone into that compound." Norah ejected a magazine, slammed a new one home. "That's what the report says." "And you made it out. That's what you see standing here." He grinned. "All right then, Hill, guess you belong." The next round of gunfire cut the conversation short, but the look he gave her after wasn't curiosity anymore. It was acknowledgement. By the end of her first month, they stopped testing her through words. Instead, they started trusting her with tasks that mattered. Precision infiltration, real intelligence feeds, missions that didn't exist. One night the colonel handed her a sealed folder. "You're leading the next one," he said. Norah flipped it open. Photos, coordinates, a small compound in Somalia. "What's the objective?" "High-value target, financial node for a terrorist network. You breach, secure, extract. No civilian casualties." "Team size?" "6. He paused. "But you'll be first in." She nodded once, understood. That night, as they prepped gear in the staging bay, Norah moved through her routine like a ritual, checking weapon, optics, comms. Not because she doubted the equipment, but because ritual brought calm. Mason watched her tighten her sling. "You always this quiet before ops?" She gave a faint smile. "Loud thoughts, quiet mouth." "Good philosophy." He pulled on his gloves. "You nervous?" "Always." He looked surprised, even after Syria. Especially after Syria. She didn't elaborate, she didn't need to. Fear wasn't weakness, it was fuel. At 200 they lifted off. Black sky, black sea, the thrum of rotor blades vibrating through her bones. The moment the ramp opened, wind and salt hit her face. Night vision down, rifle up. She led the way. The assault lasted 6 minutes. It was supposed to last 15. They breached low, fast, and silent, Norah's movement surgical. She flowed through the compound like a shadow with purpose. 2 guards down before they could shout. 1 gunman disarmed with a single close-quarters pivot that ended with her rifle pressed against his chest. Every motion clean, disciplined. By the time Mason and the others cleared the far building, the objective was secured. When they regrouped, one of the operators muttered, half to himself, "Hill moves like she's been doing this her whole life." Mason chuckled, "Maybe she has." Norah didn't answer. She just looked toward the horizon, dawn beginning to bleed into the sea, and said quietly, "Let's go home." Back at base, after-action reports came in glowing. The colonel called her in. "Your team performed flawlessly," he said. "No casualties, no civilian hits, mission success." "Thank you, sir." He leaned back. "You're aware, Major, that this unit hasn't had a female operator in lead command before?" "Yes, sir." "Does that bother you?" "No, sir." He smiled faintly. Good, because it doesn't bother me either. He slid a file across the desk. Next operations in 3 weeks. You'll brief the team. She took the folder, understood. Over the following months, Norah earned something far harder than medals: trust. When the call came for dangerous jobs, they didn't hesitate to say her name. When the briefings turned tense, her input carried weight. She wasn't the female officer anymore. She was Major Hill, the one who got things done. The others started jokingly calling her Ghost. It wasn't because she disappeared. It was because she arrived before anyone heard her. And sometimes, when they returned from missions that barely made it into logs, she'd feel Hayes's coin in her pocket, that small circle of defiance that reminded her why she was here. But not every battle came with gunfire. Some came in quiet corridors, with paperwork and whispers. There were still officers, old guard, unseen faces, who didn't like what she represented. Rumors started floating through channels she wasn't supposed to hear, that she'd been reckless, that her promotion had been politics, that her heroism in Syria was luck wrapped in chaos. One evening, she walked into the ops bay and found 2 men from another unit looking at the video feed of her Syria raid. They didn't notice her at first. She was lucky, one said. One mistake and she'd have been vapor. Still can't believe they promoted her, if it were anyone else. She didn't wait for them to finish. You're right, she said quietly. They spun. She stepped closer, eyes level. It wasn't luck, it was decision, every 10 seconds, every shot. Luck doesn't reload under fire. They didn't answer, she didn't wait. When she walked out, she wasn't angry, just tired. Because she understood something now. It wasn't just the enemy that doubted you. Sometimes it was the people you fought beside. Her next mission silenced the last of them. Iraq night raid, high-value target extraction. The plan went sideways mid-operation, 2 operators pinned, comms cut. Norah made the call, not standard procedure, her gut. She flanked wide, moved through open ground under fire, took out 2 shooters with clean precision, and dragged both teammates back behind cover. When the debrief came, her commander said it simply, "You saved 2 lives tonight, Hill." But that wasn't the part that stuck. Later, Mason found her sitting outside the armory, cleaning her rifle under the pale floodlights. "You ever get tired of saving people?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I get tired of proving I can." He nodded. "You don't have to anymore." And in that quiet moment, she realized maybe she didn't. 6 months in, she got a classified commendation. Hayes attended the closed ceremony, now a 2-star general. Afterward, he found her outside, the way he always did. "You've built quite a reputation," he said. "For what?" "Making the impossible look like protocol." She smiled faintly. "They still don't quite trust me." "They will, you know how I can tell." "How?" "Because they rely on you without realizing it." He paused, studying her the way he had the first time they met, measuring not ability but balance. "You've changed," he said softly. "So have you, sir." "No," he smiled. "I just got older, you got sharper." He handed her another envelope. Inside was an old photograph, the 2 of them years ago at Ranger School graduation. He'd signed the back. "You proved it every day." Her throat tightened. She slipped the photo into her vest pocket beside the coin. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. Just keep showing them what right looks like." That night, as she sat alone in the barracks, she thought about the strange symmetry of it all, how the road from defiance to recognition had taken her exactly where she didn't expect, a place that demanded silence more than validation. The missions came, the years blurred, the headlines never did. But deep down she knew this was what belonging felt like. Not applause, not acknowledgement, just trust. And for someone who'd once gone alone into the dark, that was enough. Sometimes belonging doesn't mean being accepted. Sometimes it means being undeniable. And in a world that doubted her, Major Norah Hill didn't fight for permission anymore. She fought for purpose, because real courage doesn't wait for approval. It simply acts. Why did the hardest part of leadership feel like watching someone else risk what you once did alone? 18 months into her assignment with Special Operations Command, Major Norah Hill had become the quiet constant in a unit built on chaos. No headlines, no interviews, just results. Files stamped classified carried her name in the margin, not in bold print, but in the small, neat signature of someone who didn't need credit to know what she'd done mattered. In the small circle of those who operated where politics couldn't reach, her reputation had changed from rumor to legend. But legends had a price. Because the higher you rose in special operations, the further you drifted from ordinary human things like sleep, simplicity, or the comfort of being understood. And tonight, as she stood in a darkened hangar watching her team load into a C-130, Norah felt that distance like a weight on her chest. She wasn't going with them. This time, she was the one giving the orders. "Target in the northern valley," she said, her voice even, projecting over the aircraft's noise. "A known facilitator. We've been tracking his movements for 2 weeks. He'll be in the compound for less than 4 hours. That's our window." Her team, 6 operators, hardened by a dozen missions together, listened without interruption. Mason, now her team sergeant, leaned forward. "We're wheels down at 200. "Correct. You breach from the south wall. Intel confirms 2 technicals and a dozen armed combatants. We're not expecting resistance beyond that, but you know better than to trust easy missions." He nodded. "Extraction point." Norah pointed to the map projected behind her. "Here, Ridge Line Bravo, 40 minutes after H-hour, whether or not we have the target." She paused, eyes moving across the faces she knew too well. No heroics, no deviations. You get in, secure the package, and get out. They all nodded, but Mason caught her tone. He tilted his head slightly. "You sound like command." "That's because I am command," she said, almost smiling. "You hate that." "Every second." The team laughed, the kind of low, familiar sound that made the air less heavy. Then they loaded up. When the C-130's ramp closed, the laughter vanished. Norah stood alone in the hangar, watching the plane taxi down the runway until it became a shape swallowed by the dark. She checked her watch, 23:47. 2 hours until insertion. That was the worst part, the waiting. When you weren't the one on the ground, all you could do was sit and think. And she'd never been good at sitting. She walked to the operations room, screens glowing with satellite imagery. Analysts murmured updates. The mission played out in dots and numbers. But to Norah, those weren't dots. They were her people. At 02:13 hours, everything went wrong. The feed crackled. The drone image jittered, then cut to static. "We've lost visuals," an analyst called out. Norah was already moving. "Comms. Still active but intermittent. Terrain interference. Patch me through." She grabbed a headset, voice sharp. "Echo team, this is command. Do you copy?" Static, then Mason's voice, low but steady. "Copy command, we're inside. Target secured. But we've got movement, more hostiles than expected." Norah's pulse quickened. "Numbers." "At least 20, maybe more. We're pinned near the north wall." Her stomach tightened. She could hear gunfire in the background, sharp, controlled bursts. Extraction window moved up. "You need to move now." "Negative, too hot to exfil. They've got RPGs, we can't." The comms cut. A long, sick silence followed. Norah's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her jaw. She turned to the analysts. "Reacquire drone feed, now." "Trying, ma'am. We're getting interference from." "Bypass it." Her voice was ice. I don't care how, get me eyes. The room scrambled, cables plugged, commands typed. Then the image flickered back on smoke, movement, muzzle flashes. The compound was chaos. Norah watched the feed like she was there again, like she was the one crouched behind the wall, hearing bullets hit too close. Her team was surrounded. 6 operators against at least 30 hostiles now flooding the courtyard. It was the same math she'd faced in Syria. Different place, same nightmare. And the same helpless feeling clawed at her chest, the one that came from being on the wrong side of the radio. She didn't think, she just moved. Prep the secondary team, she ordered. The operations officer blinked. Ma'am, that's not your call. It is now. Major, we can't deploy without higher approval. She turned and her eyes silenced him. Then get it, or get out of my way. Minutes later, she was in the armory, throwing on gear she hadn't worn in weeks. Rifle, vest, sidearm, comms. The operator assigned to her comm channel hesitated. Ma'am, you're not on the manifest. Add me. Ma'am. Mason out there. That was all she said, and that was all that mattered. The helicopter cut through the desert night like a ghost. 4 operators, 1 major, no authorization. Just like before. But this time, she wasn't going alone to save a commander. She was going to save her team. Wind whipped her hair beneath the headset. The smell of fuel and dust mixed with the metallic taste of adrenaline. Every muscle in her body remembered what it meant to be on the edge, the weight of the rifle, the steady rhythm of breath before chaos. The pilot's voice crackled, 2 minutes out. Norah leaned forward. Copy that, we go silent on approach. No lights, no flares. Understood. The team beside her checked weapons. No one questioned her being there. They all knew the story. They'd read the files. And deep down, every one of them understood. If anyone could pull this off, it was Hill. They touched down in dust and silence, a kilometer from the compound. Norah hit the ground first, crouched low, scanning. The horizon glowed faintly from muzzle flashes. The battle was still raging. She signaled. They moved fast. When they reached the outer wall, she could see bodies, some of hers, some of theirs. Her throat tightened. Mason's voice came faintly through the radio, fragmented by static. Still north of 2 down, can't hold. Norah closed her eyes, just long enough to steady herself. Then she whispered, I've got you. And she went in. The breach was clean. Her team spread out, each taking a sector. Norah moved low through the smoke, night vision cutting through chaos. A gunman turned the corner. She fired twice, center mass. The air was thick with the smell of dust, cordite and blood. She found Mason dragging a wounded operator behind a broken wall, bullets chipping the stone inches above his head. When he saw her, disbelief flashed across his face. Hill, what the hell? Later, she knelt, applied pressure to the wound. He's stable enough to move. Yeah, but we're boxed in. Not for long. She tossed him a spare magazine, then leaned out, scanning the courtyard. 3 shooters near the east tower, 2 more moving along the wall. She exhaled slowly, switched to semi-auto, and began eliminating them one by one. Each shot precise, measured. When the last man fell, the courtyard went quiet except for the sound of her breathing. Clear, she said. Clear, Mason echoed. They regrouped, dragging the wounded toward the extraction point. But as they moved, a burst of fire from the roof tore through the night. Mason dropped, hit in the shoulder. Norah returned fire, climbed onto a ledge, and took the shooter down with 2 rounds. Then she was beside him, dragging him with one arm, blood soaking her sleeve. You shouldn't have come, he gasped. Neither should you have stayed, she shot back. We're even then. He laughed, a broken, breathless sound. You never could follow rules. Still can't. By the time they reached the ridge, The helicopter was inbound. The survivors, 4 total, 2 wounded, piled aboard under fire. Norah was last. She turned back once, scanning the horizon. The compound was a skeleton of smoke and fire, the same kind of ruin she'd left behind in Syria. Then she climbed in. As they lifted off, Mason slumped against the bulkhead, pale but grinning weakly. "You know Command's gonna lose their minds again. Probably. Think they'll promote you twice this time. Doubt it. You deserve it." She didn't answer, just looked out the door at the dark expanse below. She wasn't thinking about medals or hearings. She was thinking about the 2 men they'd lost and the weight that never got lighter, no matter how many you saved. Hours later, back at base, she stood in the med bay doorway watching Mason sleep under sedation. The doctor's voice was soft behind her. "He'll live. You got there just in time." She nodded. "You know you'll be called in again," the doctor added. "They'll ask why you went." Norah looked at Mason, then at her hands still shaking, still red. Because no one else would have. When the inquiry came 3 days later, it was quieter than before. No raised voices, no threats of punishment. Just a general sitting across from her, studying her for a long time. "You do realize, Major," he said finally, "that you can't keep doing this." "Doing what, sir?" "Saving people by breaking protocol." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe the protocol's wrong." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You know, Hill, every generation there's someone like you, the one who doesn't wait for orders, the one who moves because standing still costs too much. You keep the rest of us honest, but it's a lonely place to live." She nodded quietly. "It's where the job is, sir." He studied her another moment, then leaned back. "Dismissed, and Hill, you did the right thing, again." That night Norah walked outside, the air cold, the desert sky full of stars she'd never get used to. She pulled the challenge coin from her pocket, the one with 20 enemies and 0 regrets. The metal was worn now, edges dulled by time and friction. She turned it between her fingers. The reflection of the moon glinted across its surface, like a reminder or a warning. Maybe courage wasn't about defiance. Maybe it was about endurance, doing what needed to be done again and again, until it stopped feeling like a choice. She closed her hand around the coin and whispered into the quiet. "Still worth it." Sometimes courage isn't about one moment of heroism. It's about the thousands of small ones that follow. When you still choose to act, even after you've learned the cost. Why did it feel harder to breathe when the war went quiet? For the first time in years, Major Norah Hill wasn't deployed, wasn't planning, wasn't waiting for the next red circle to appear on a satellite image. She was on leave. Command had called it mandatory decompression, a polite way of saying you've gone too far for too long. So here she was, a rented cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. One duffel bag, one rifle she didn't need, and a silence that pressed against her chest like weight. She thought the quiet would help. It didn't. Because when the noise stopped, the memories got loud. Gunfire, the metallic click of a reload, Mason shouting through smoke, Hayes's voice over the comm, the one she thought she'd never hear again. They came in flashes, not nightmares, not quite, just echoes. And the worst part wasn't the memories, it was how much she missed them. The mission, the focus, the clarity that came only when life and death sat shoulder to shoulder, and there wasn't time to doubt which one you'd be shaking hands with. She'd never say it out loud, but the truth was simple. She didn't know how to live without the war. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She ignored it. Buzzed again, same number. She picked up, voice flat, "Hill." A pause, then, "Still answering like you're in a command center." She smiled despite herself, "Sir. How's leave treating you?" Trying to remember what quiet sounds like. Dangerous habit. I've noticed. Hayes's voice softened. Listen, Norah, I didn't call to talk about quiet. I called because there's noise coming. Her body tensed. What kind of noise? A mission, off book, the kind where we can't ask officially. You're not in my chain anymore. I'm aware, but the people who are trust me to reach you. She leaned back in the chair, eyes narrowing. You know what they told me before I left. If she acts without orders again, she's finished. That's the problem with the rule book, he said. It doesn't fit reality. And this one does. It's not about rules, Norah. It's about people. That made her pause. There's a team operating in northern Yemen. Humanitarian liaison mission gone wrong. 2 Americans captured, 1 confirmed alive. No resources in range. Commands moving slow. And you want me to move fast. I want you to do what you do best. She looked out the window at the dark tree line. Rain whispered against the glass. Send me the file. You sure? No, she said, but send it anyway. 12 hours later, she was back in a hangar she wasn't supposed to be in. The gear felt both familiar and foreign, like touching an old scar you thought had faded. A small transport waited on the tarmac. 2 pilots, no insignia, 1 sealed envelope with coordinates. As she climbed aboard, the pilot glanced back. Orders, ma'am. She handed him the file. These are the coordinates. We fly low, no transponder. You didn't see me, I wasn't here. He nodded. Copy that. She could see the curiosity in his eyes, that mix of recognition and disbelief. Everyone in certain circles knew her story. The one who went alone. The one who didn't wait. But he didn't ask. Professionals didn't. The engine started. The hum built. The runway lights blurred into streaks of gold and gray. And just like that, the stillness she'd been drowning in was gone. She was back in motion. The flight was long, long enough to think. And that was dangerous. She wasn't 25 anymore, chasing proof that she belonged. She was 38, carrying ghosts she hadn't buried. She thought about the 2 captured Americans, faces she didn't know, names she hadn't learned. But she didn't need names, she just needed purpose. Because purpose was the only antidote to the silence. Touchdown came at 200 hours on a dirt airstrip that wasn't on any map. She stepped into the heat, the smell of sand and diesel. A small team of local militia met her, allies of convenience. They looked at her like they didn't quite believe the operation had sent only 1 person. One of them, an older man with deep lines around his eyes, spoke through a translator. You came alone. That's right. This is dangerous ground. It usually is. He nodded, something between respect and pity flickering in his eyes. They handed her a satellite map. Compound here, 2 hostages, 20 fighters, maybe more. You cannot enter through the main road. I wasn't planning to. That night, Norah found herself lying prone on a ridge, night vision cutting the world into green fragments. Below her, the compound pulsed with dim lights and cigarette embers. She could hear the faint echo of laughter, the kind of laughter that made her stomach turn, because she'd heard it before, right before the execution started. Her hands moved automatically, checking rifle, loading mags, adjusting sights. She'd done this 100 times. The motions had their own rhythm, almost soothing. But tonight it felt different. Not fear, not adrenaline, something heavier. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't about the hostages. This was about the question she'd been avoiding since Syria. What happens when the war becomes the only thing that makes you feel alive? She didn't have an answer, so she focused on what she could control. The mission. She started moving at 300. 2 kilometers down a dry ravine. No moonlight, no backup, just her heartbeat and the whisper of sand under boots. When she reached the outer perimeter, she counted 8 guards, the same number she'd faced that first night years ago. She remembered that night, the sound of Hayes's voice over the radio, the silence that followed. And she remembered what it felt like to stop being afraid of dying. That was the night she stopped being someone's soldier and became her own. Now she wasn't here for orders or permission. She was here because someone needed her to be. She moved fast, efficient, 2 guards down, then 3. The rest fell in sequence, each shot a memory of muscle and instinct. When she reached the main building, she found the first hostage, male, mid-30s, alive but beaten. She cut his restraints, gave him water, told him not to speak. He looked at her like she wasn't real. Who are you? No one, she said. Can you walk? He nodded shakily. Then walk. She led him to a small storage alcove, covered him with a tarp. Stay here quiet. Then she turned back into the dark. The second hostage was harder. She found him in a basement, chained, bleeding, barely conscious. When she reached him, his eyes fluttered open. American. Yeah. I thought. Don't think we're leaving. She broke the chain with a pry bar she'd taken from the guard room. Metal screamed in the silence. Someone shouted above them. Then the alarm started. The quiet part was over. The next 15 minutes were chaos. Gunfire echoing through hallways, shouting in Arabic, the strobe flash of muzzle fire turning the world into broken frames of motion. She moved through it like she always did, precise, deliberate, terrifyingly calm. Every decision made without hesitation, because hesitation killed. By the time she reached the outer gate, both hostages were alive. But she wasn't untouched. A round had grazed her arm, another had clipped her plate carrier hard enough to bruise. She didn't feel the pain yet. That came later. Right now, she was too busy surviving. The extraction point was a dry wadi 3 kilometers out. She half-carried the weaker hostage, her breath sharp, vision tunneling. Behind them, the compound burned. When they reached the rendezvous, she keyed her radio. Package secure, ready for pickup. Static, then a voice faint, almost incredulous. Hill, is that you? In the flesh, 2 hostages alive, extraction coordinates transmitting now. We thought you were retired. So did I. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. She loaded the hostages first, then climbed aboard last, collapsing into the seat, her body catching up to what her mind had already decided. This was the last time. She told herself that over and over. But even as the rotors lifted and the horizon caught fire behind her, she didn't quite believe it. 3 days later, she was back in the States. No medals, no public thanks, just quiet acknowledgement from people who used phrases like critical action in denied territory. She didn't want recognition, she wanted rest. But rest didn't come. Not because she couldn't sleep, but because she couldn't stop thinking. How many times had she done this now? Gone where no one else would, saved lives, and walked away with nothing but another scar under her uniform. And more importantly, how much longer could she keep going before the mission stopped being about others and became a way to fill the silence inside her? That night she called Hayes. He answered on the second ring. You made it back. Barely. You always do. She hesitated. I think I'm done, sir. Done. With all of it, the running, the saving, the pretending it's not killing me. The line went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Then be done. The uniform doesn't own you, Norah. It never did. What if I don't know who I am without it? Then you find out. That's the real fight. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because for the first time, the mission wasn't about bullets or hostages. It was about herself. And that terrified her more than any firefight ever had. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is walk away from a war that won't stop calling. And sometimes the loudest kind of courage is learning how to live in peace. Why did peace feel so unfamiliar? 6 months after her last mission, Major Norah Hill no longer wore a uniform. No more early briefings, no more classified folders slid across tables in rooms that hummed with tension. Her life had gone still, painfully still. She lived in a small coastal town now, the kind of place where no one knew her name and that suited her fine. A cottage by the water, an old truck, a stray dog she hadn't meant to keep but couldn't bring herself to let go of. The neighbors just called her Miss Hill. They didn't ask what she'd done before, and she didn't offer it. To them, she was just another quiet face who ran at dawn and walked home at dusk. But every morning, when the sun came up over the horizon, she still found herself standing at attention without realizing it. Old habits didn't die. They just went quiet. Some nights, the silence inside her house felt heavier than gunfire ever had. She'd wake from shallow sleep to the sound of phantom radio chatter, the clipped urgency of voices that weren't there. Other nights, she'd sit outside on the porch, the sea air cool against her face, the dog asleep at her feet, and think about the people she couldn't save. Not the ones who died in combat, the ones who survived but never came home the same. She knew what it meant to carry invisible wounds, the kind that didn't bleed but still ached every time someone asked, "Are you okay?" She was not really. But she was trying. And that counted for something. One afternoon, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize again. This time it was Hayes. "Major Hill." "Not anymore," she said. "This is Captain Lara Quinlan, Fort Carson Veterans Outreach. General Hayes gave me your number. I hope that's all right." "Depends what for." "We're setting up a program mentorship for transition stage soldiers. Those getting out after long tour, special operations especially. They need someone who understands. Hayes said you might." Norah hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm the poster child for healthy adjustment." Lara laughed softly. "That's exactly why we need you." A pause. "Please, Major, just come talk to them, that's all." Norah looked out at the horizon, the same endless blue she watched every morning, still trying to find meaning in it. "Send me the address." 2 days later, she walked into a conference room at Fort Carson filled with 20 young faces, men and women wearing that same expression she'd once seen in the mirror. Half readiness, half confusion. They didn't stand when she entered. They didn't know who she was yet. And that was the point. Lara introduced her simply. "This is Norah Hill. She's been where you've been." No rank, no title. Just someone who survived. When Norah spoke, her voice was quiet. "I'm not here to tell you how to move on. I'm here to tell you it's possible." A few heads lifted, a few didn't. She saw herself in all of them, the restless leg bouncing under the table, the scanning eyes, the ones who looked calm but were calculating exit routes. "You'll hear people say you've got to leave the war behind," she continued. "But the truth is, it never really leaves. It changes shape. Some days it whispers, some days it shouts. The trick is learning which voice to listen to." The room was silent. "You're not broken," she said softly. "You're just still fighting this time for yourself." After the session, a few stayed behind. One, a young sergeant with haunted eyes, approached her slowly. "Ma'am, they said you were in Syria, that rescue." "That's classified," she said with a faint smile. "Yeah," he said. "I read between the lines." He hesitated, then asked, "How'd you do it? Go alone?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because I couldn't live with not trying." He nodded, like he understood that too well. "Does it ever stop, the noise?" "No," she said honestly. "But it gets quieter when you start listening to the parts of yourself that aren't just a soldier." He didn't say anything more, just saluted her, not the crisp military kind, a small human one, a thank you. And for the first time in years, Norah returned it. Weeks turned into months. She kept coming back to the outreach program. Not because she felt obligated, but because for the first time since leaving the service, she felt useful again. She ran drills with them, taught field logic, situational awareness, leadership under pressure. But mostly she listened. And she realized something that surprised her. Courage wasn't what they were missing. They still had that. What they'd lost was permission. Permission to be something beyond what the military had made them. She helped them find that, bit by bit, story by story. And in doing so, she found a small piece of herself she didn't know she'd lost. One evening, after a session, Lara caught up to her in the parking lot. "You're good with them," she said, "better than you think." "I just talk." "No, you see them. There's a difference." Norah shrugged, "Maybe because I still see myself." Lara studied her. "You ever think about coming back, not to active duty, to teach, lead training? You've got more to give." Norah smiled faintly. "I've given enough." Lara tilted her head. "Maybe, or maybe you finally figured out what giving actually means." That stuck with her long after Lara drove away. That night Norah sat on the porch again, the dog's head resting on her knee, the sea wind cold and clean. She thought about all the missions, the ones that made her name echo in rooms she never wanted to be in. And she thought about the young faces she saw now, how their battles were just starting, even after the uniforms came off. Maybe that was her new mission. Not to fight, but to guide. Not to rescue others from the battlefield, but to help them survive the silence afterward. Because she finally understood something she hadn't when she was younger. Survival wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of another one. Weeks later, she got a letter, a real one, handwritten. No return address. Inside, a single coin. Her coin. The one Hayes had given her years ago, somehow returned after being lost during her last mission. And a short note, in handwriting she recognized even before she finished reading. "Hill, you taught me what courage really looks like, not the kind that charges into fire, the kind that learns to stand still in peace. Keep teaching them. Hayes." She read it twice, then set it down and smiled, a rare, unguarded smile. The kind that came when you stopped running from the past and started walking toward something new. Months later, she was asked to give a talk at the academy, a private lecture to the next generation of officers. She almost said no. Then she remembered the sergeant's question, "Does the noise ever stop?" So she went. The auditorium was full. Young cadets in pressed uniforms, notebooks ready, eyes wide with the same mix of fear and ambition she'd once had. When she walked on stage, the room quieted. "You've probably heard stories about me," she began. "Most of them are true, some aren't, but none of them matter as much as what I learned afterward. A beat. You can train for combat, you can train for chaos, but no one trains you for what comes when it's over, for how to carry everything you saw and everything you lost without letting it destroy what's left." The room was still. You could have heard a pin drop. "If you remember anything from this," she said softly, "remember this. The uniform is what you wear. It's not who you are. Never forget the person underneath it." She let the silence stretch, then smiled faintly. "And if you ever find yourself alone, wondering if what you did mattered, it did. More than you'll ever know." Applause didn't come right away. Then one cadet stood, then another, until the entire room was on its feet. She didn't bow, just nodded once, the quiet acknowledgement of someone who understood what true respect looked like. Later outside, Lara found her again. "You know," she said, "you could write a book." "I'd rather live one." "Then what's next, Major Hill?" Norah looked out toward the setting sun, the horizon painted in gold and gray, colors that reminded her of every battlefield and every dawn that came after. "Something quiet," she said, but not empty. You think you'll ever go back? Norah smiled, slow and knowing. To the war, no, but it'll always come with me. The difference is I know how to carry it now. That night she wrote something down in her old mission journal, the same one she, once filled with coordinates, tactics, and kill counts. Just one line. Peace is not the absence of war. It's the courage to stop fighting what's already over. Sometimes the battlefield isn't a place. It's a memory you learn to walk through without armor. And sometimes the bravest warriors are the ones who find grace in silence. Why did endings never feel like endings? Years had passed since Major Norah Hill last wore her uniform. The medals sat in a drawer she rarely opened. The rifle she once carried now leaned quietly against the wall, its metal gathering a soft film of dust. She lived simply. No fanfare, no ceremonies. Just morning light spilling across the ocean and the slow rhythm of days that finally had no countdown attached to them. But peace, she'd learned, wasn't the same as stillness. Some mornings she still woke before dawn, expecting an alarm that never came. Her body always remembered what her mind tried to forget, the tension before movement, the silence before orders. And some nights she'd stand by the window, hand on the glass, watching storms roll over the water. Lightning, wind, rain, and somewhere inside it, the ghost of the battlefield. Because part of her still belonged to that world. Not out of regret, out of respect. She spent her days teaching at a veterans center near the coast, not tactics anymore, but transition, helping those who came back to remember how to live. The room always felt familiar, plain walls, folding chairs, faces that hid more than they said. She never lectured. She just spoke softly, the way someone does when they've learned the hard way that volume doesn't make truth louder. "You'll think the hardest part is leaving the service," she told them once. "It's not. The hardest part is forgiving yourself for surviving." That line stuck. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't heroic, but it was honest, and that's what they needed most. One afternoon, a man walked in halfway through her session, gray hair, uniform crisp, eyes that still scanned every doorway. She didn't need to see the name tag to know. "General Hayes," she said softly. He smiled. "You still spot a commander better than a radar." "And you still walk like one," she said. He chuckled. "I heard you were lecturing now. I had to see it to believe it." "Not lecturing," she said, "listening. You always were better at that than giving orders." They talked for an hour after the session ended about nothing and everything. About old missions, mutual ghosts, and the quiet truth that no one really leaves the military. They just carry it differently. When he stood to leave, he handed her a small box. Inside, a new coin, blackened steel, engraved with only 3 words, "For what comes after." "You earned this one too," he said. "You know, I don't collect these anymore." "It's not a medal, Norah. It's a reminder that you made it out, and that matters." She looked up at him, eyes soft. "Does it ever get easier?" He shook his head. "No, but it gets clearer." "Clearer?" "Yeah, you start realizing all the things you did weren't about war. They were about people. And the moment you see that, the rest starts to make sense." Then he left, no salute, no goodbye. Just the quiet respect of one survivor to another. That night, Norah sat on the porch again. The ocean was calm, the sky clear, the air smelled of rain that hadn't fallen yet. She rolled the coin in her palm, the cold metal warming slowly against her skin. She thought about all the people who'd crossed her path. Mason, Hayes, the hostages, the cadets, the sergeant who'd asked if the noise ever stopped. She realized something then. Every mission she'd ever taken, every life she'd ever risked had led here, to this quiet moment. Not to glory, not to peace, but to understanding. Because the real war had never been out there. It had always been inside. The following morning, she found a letter in her mailbox. No stamp, no name, just her address in handwriting she recognized instantly. Inside was a folded photo, grainy, taken years ago. Her standing in a hangar, gear on, head bowed, the day before the Syria mission. On the back, a message. You didn't go alone, you never did. We all carried you with us, even those you saved. Em. She smiled, a sad, proud kind of smile. Mason. Alive, still out there somewhere. And somehow that was enough. That evening she went down to the shoreline. The wind was sharp, the waves restless. She pulled the 2 coins from her pocket, the first one from Syria, worn smooth by time, and the new one Hayes had given her. She knelt, pressing them both into the wet sand. One for who she was, one for who she'd become. Then she stood, letting the tide wash over them, carrying both back into the sea. A soft goodbye, not to the life she left, but to the weight she no longer needed to carry. Weeks later, she got a call from Lara. We're opening a permanent center, Lara said. A retreat for female veterans, a place to train, heal, and lead. We want you to run it. I'm not sure I'm the leadership type anymore. That's exactly why you are. Norah hesitated, then asked, what would you call it? We thought maybe the Hill Project. She was quiet for a long time. No, she said finally, call it Valkyrie Haven. Why that? Because sometimes the ones who carried others out of the fire deserve a place to land too. Months later, the center opened. It wasn't a base. It wasn't therapy. It was something gentler, part sanctuary, part training ground. There were gardens where soldiers learned to plant again, art rooms where silence was filled with color, and long trails that led to the cliffs overlooking the ocean. Norah spent her days there, some days teaching, some days just walking with those who needed quiet company. She never called them patients. She called them fighters finding calm. And sometimes, when new arrivals asked about her, the woman from the stories, the one who went behind enemy lines alone, she'd just smile and say, that was someone I used to know. Because the woman who'd gone into Syria that night had done what she had to. But the woman who walked these cliffs now was learning what she chose to. Years later, when the military historians finally found her again, the ones who wanted to record her missions for an archive, she agreed to one interview. 1. They asked about strategy, planning, weapons, leadership under pressure. She answered politely, briefly. Then one of them, a young lieutenant, asked, "What's the one thing war taught you, Major Hill?" She thought for a long moment. "That bravery isn't loud," she said softly. "It's quiet. It's the moment you decide to do what's right, even when no one's watching." He scribbled that down like it was a quote for a book. But she wasn't thinking in quotes. She was thinking in memories. And in forgiveness. One morning, years later, she woke early, the way she always did, and walked to the cliff above the water. The dog was gone now, buried under the tree behind the cottage. The sea was calm again. She stood there, the sun breaking through low clouds, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the instinct to move or act or fix. She just was. And in that stillness, she realized something she'd spent a lifetime chasing. Peace wasn't something you found. It was something you allowed. A week later, a young woman arrived at the Haven, newly retired, anxious, eyes scanning every movement. Norah met her at the gate. "I'm told you were someone once," the woman said. Norah smiled gently. "Still am, just in a different way." "You really went behind enemy lines alone." "Once." "Why?" Norah looked toward the horizon, where sky met sea in a line too perfect to be real. "Because someone needed me to, and because I hadn't yet learned there were other ways to be brave." The woman nodded, eyes wet. "I want to learn that too." "Then you're already halfway there." She placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. Come on, let's start. They walked together toward the main building, sunlight breaking across the waves behind them. Years later, after Norah was gone, they kept her room just as she'd left it, the journal on the nightstand, the boots by the door, the last entry written in her looping, disciplined handwriting. Courage begins in chaos. But peace is where you decide to stay. Below it, a small metal coin, the last one engraved simply with her call sign. Valkyrie 1. And in the quiet halls of the Haven, the legend of Major Norah Hill lived on, not in stories of missions or medals, but in the quiet strength she left behind. Because she had taught an entire generation, something the battlefield never could. That dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.